work to ensure it effectively is serving the American people, and that's why we're here today. This hearing comes at a critical time for the Postal Service. 2 years ago, I led the passage of the Bipartisan Postal Service Reform Act, the first major reform to the Postal Service in over 15 years. This legislation set the agency on a more stable financial footing and provided critical transparency on local service to the public. This legislation has eliminated unfair financial burdens that have long undermined the Postal Service, and in total will provide $50 billion in financial relief over the next 10 years. The intent of this law was to help ensure the Postal Service can keep reliably serving all communities. 2 years later, the Postal Service is implementing this legislation, including helping postal employees and retirees integrate their health care with Medicare. But the agency has also taken a series of changes on its own, reforms that it claims to help save money and to improve operations. These operational changes appear to be significant. The Postal Service plans to make changes to its processing and delivery network across the country. It plans to consolidate facilities into larger, more centralized hubs and reduce the number of times that mail is collected at facilities each day. In some communities, these changes have unfortunately disrupted or caused declines in services. I remain concerned about these changes. There's no clear evidence that shows these changes will improve service in the long run. And when I have asked the Postal Service for detailed studies, it has not been provided to me. The Postal Service has even said it must execute more changes before studying their impacts, essentially plowing ahead without knowing whether service will be harmed. It is also not clear these changes will actually save money. We know these changes led to increased cost at one facility, and the Postal Service has not been transparent about their overall cost projections. So far, these changes appear to be moving in the wrong direction. Service is down, cost is up, and customers are being let down. I've called on the Postal Service to pause these changes until it can show they won't undermine the agency's primary responsibility to provide timely and reliable service to the community. Before moving further, the Postal Service must study the locations that have been altered so far, investigate the root causes of disruptions, restore normal service, and understand the long-term implications of this plan. If the Postal Service continues moving forward at this drastic pace without studying the impacts, they will harm service and drive customers nationwide. The Postal Service must continue adapting to ensure it's consistently improving service, but it needs to proceed with caution to ensure it protects on-time delivery for the communities who rely on the Postal Service each and every day. This committee is committed to conducting oversight to hold the Postal Service to this mission, and I look forward to the witnesses addressing the concerns that I have raised here today. I look forward to working to improve the health of the Postal Service and to make sure that we protect this vital and critical institution. With that, I'd like to turn over this to Ranking Member Paul for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In an 1808 letter, Thomas Jefferson shared simple wisdom that seems to have evaded the federal government. Jefferson wrote, "I do not know on what principles of reasoning it is that good men think that the public ought to pay more for a thing that they would themselves, if they were buying it themselves. It is those principles or reasoning, or rather the lack thereof, that bring us here today." In 2020, Congress was led to believe that the $107 billion bailout of the Postal Service would pull the Postal Service out of the hole. Instead, we were told they would break even. We were even told they would break even by 2031. Postmaster General DeJoy sat in front of this committee in August of that year and stated, "I am absolutely convinced that with some help from Congress and our regulator, we can do it, and that there is a bright future ahead for the Postal Service." I argued that giving more money to the Postal Service was equivalent to burning money. However, that may have been a false equivalency because at least when we burn money, it provides warmth. Given the continued financial shortfalls of the Postal Service, it is entirely nonsensical for it to convert more than 125,000 service workers into career roles since October 2020, which effectively allows those workers to make 50% more hourly and is insourcing jobs that were provided at a lower cost by private partners. During the Postal Service Reform Act, I argued that no funding should be given to USPS without changing its labor practices. Instead, No labor changes were made, and now Americans are left holding the bag of an ever more bloated Postal Service. The service has tried to explain away these bad numbers due to costs that they cannot control. But the service is spending $9.6 billion in electric delivery vehicles and spending nearly $40 billion over 10 years to convert and build certain facilities into hubs that so far do not seem to work. This hasn't stopped Congress from throwing even more money at the Postal Service by way of $10 billion through the CARES Act funds and $3 billion more to buy electric delivery trucks. For those counting, that's $120 billion in funding relief in the past 4 years alone. While $120 billion is already an astounding number on its own, when you consider this sum relative to our nation's dismal fiscal condition, it suddenly becomes reckless. We have nearly $35 trillion in debt, or 122% of GDP. This is the highest level of debt this nation has ever had, and we show no signs of slowing down and adding nearly $1 trillion to our debt every 100 days. This year, we have already spent more to pay the interest on our debt than we have on our own defense. Now, the Postal Service is asking Congress to provide it with an additional $14 to $100 billion in taxpayer dollars by transferring funds from the Office of Personnel Management to USPS. At some point, Congress needs to pull its head out of the sand and stop throwing money we don't have at an agency to maintain status quo, especially when the status quo means more deficits. USPS needs massive structural reform, not necessarily in its network, but in its workforce, hiring and retention. Today's hearing will provide Americans transparency in what their dollars are funding, in why their post office is not meeting their service and delivery goals, and it will reveal Congress's lack of prudence in legislating decision-making.
Thank you, Ranking Member Paul. It's the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses, so if each of you would please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Thank you. Our first witness today is Louis DeJoy. He is the 75th Postmaster General of the United States and Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Postal Service. He was appointed by the organization's Board of Governors and began his tenure in June of 2020. Mr. DeJoy previously spent over 3 decades in the private sector, running a logistics business as both its chairman and its CEO. Mr. DeJoy, it's good to have you here before us today. You may proceed with your opening comments.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Paul, and members of the committee. I welcome the opportunity to testify today and describe and discuss the challenges that face the United States Postal Service and the opportunities for our future. I commend the committee and Chairman Peters for passage of the Postal Reform Act of 2022. Thankfully, PSRA clarified long-standing questions and solved several legacy retirement issues, which are immensely helpful to our long-term prognosis. However, as important for our current discussion, PSRA did not legislate solutions for our operational problems or ensure our financial survival. Instead, more work needs to be done, and the PSRA confirmed that it's up to the Postal Service to take the appropriate and necessary actions to save the Postal Service fully. With the PSRA now law, I am not here with any specific legislation requests of this committee. Instead, what we need now is for our stakeholders to support us in the implementation of key self-help initiatives outlined in the Delivering for America plan that are critically necessary, and that will ultimately enable our operational and financial success. I remind this committee that the DFA plan played an important role in gaining support for the passage of the Postal Reform Act of 2022. In addition to the reversal of unfair requirements to pre-fund retiree health care benefits, certain foundational underpinnings of the DFA were in fact incorporated in legislation, such as 6-day-a-week delivery and operating an integral mail and package network. I also offer the committee that the DFA very much aligned with our legislative requirement to be financially self-sustaining, a fundamental business model concept to which I am fully and firmly committed to, and which is at the core of almost every DFA initiative. As senators, you understand the Postal Service had been a financial and operational death spiral the 14 years prior to my arrival here in June of 2020, and had no effective plan to improve operations or curtail financial losses. The Postal Service was destined for financial collapse. But for the initiatives identified in the DFA plan and the actions we are now taking to remedy the untenable and unsustainable financial, organizational, and operational condition I found the Postal Service in when I assumed this position, there are simply no alternative strategies that I have seen that holistically address the legacy elements with the constraints that exist and put us on the path to long-term viability. When I last appeared before this committee, I was a few months into my tenure at the Postal Service, and the nation and the Postal Service were amid a global pandemic. The pandemic demonstrated the Postal Service's essential and fundamental value to the nation's critical infrastructure and our unique ability to reach every American daily. I now appear before you with 3.5 years of heightened understanding under my belt, and with a sense of urgency regarding the need to ensure the Postal Service's financial and operational staying power. Today, I have a formidable team alongside me, the men and women of the United States Postal Service, working harder and smarter than ever before to transform this organization so that it has a relevant and viable future to service the American people. I am proud of their efforts. This committee should be proud of their efforts. The American people should be proud of their efforts. The committee should be fully aware of our significant progress we have made on our 10-year strategic plan, the DFA plan, as well as the significant obstacles that lay ahead. We remain firm in our position that the status quo is not an option if we want a financially self-sufficient Postal Service that provides the high-quality service expected of us far into the future. I ask that you recognize that our pursuit of long-term viability should have begun over a decade earlier, and that the damage inflicted on the organization by all stakeholders failing to react, evolve, or engage has produced an organization that was a defeated and locked into strategies of the past that proved self-destructive in a modern American economy and given the volume and mail mix changes. As a result, the road to success will not be a straight and easy path. Rather, it will be a series of accomplishments, struggles, and recoveries that will be uncomfortable at times. However, in the end, we will not only produce the operating and financial successes to which we aspire, but we will also advance the institutional culture of the organization, enabling us to engage in our future in a much more logical, organized, confident, and successful manner, starkly different from how we engaged our recent past. My hope is that all stakeholders recognize the challenges this management team faces in stemming its losses, reconstituting its infrastructure, and breaking down long-standing practices that have deprived the American people of a viable postal service. And I hope that they join us in accomplishing the ongoing improvements we aspire. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Postmaster General DeJoy. Our second witness is Roman Martinez IV. He was appointed to the Postal Service Board of Governors and confirmed by the Senate in August of 2019. As chairman, he is responsible for leading the Board of Governors, which oversees and approves the Postal Service's financial as well as operational plans to ensure that it's on the right track. Mr. Martinez's previous career experience is in investment banking and business, including 3 decades at Lehman Brothers. Mr. Martinez, you're recognized for your opening comments.
Thank you. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Paul, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today. I am honored to serve as chair of the Board of Governors. I joined the board with almost 50 years of experience in business and financial markets, including almost 30 years serving on boards of private, public, and not-for-profit organizations. From experience, I have learned to analyze complex business and financial challenges and to appreciate best practices of board governance. 3 years ago, Postal Management and our Board of Governors developed a 10-year Delivering for America plan to set the Postal Service on a path to fulfill its mission and to become financially self-sufficient. The Board of Governors continues to support the DFA plan and Postmaster General DeJoy's efforts to implement this incredibly complex and critical transformation of the Postal Service. We fully recognize that these changes will not be without impacts and temporary service disruptions. We must learn from such impacts and recover as quickly as possible. Now, I would like to make some comments on our financial results because they're very frequently misunderstood. Because the Postal Service has no control over some key expenses, it is important to analyze its financial results by focusing on its controllable income laws, which are the results that may be addressed by management. This is akin to the operating results of a company, not the extraordinary items that are sometimes needed to be recorded. When uncontrollable factors are added to the financial statements as required by generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP, sizable losses are reported. Those losses are not the correct way to judge the financial results of the Delivering for America plan. I'll explain. During the first quarter of fiscal 2024, the Postal Service recorded approximately $500 million of controllable income, but yet a net loss of $2.1 billion under GAAP. There are three main uncontrollable factors that resulted in the sizable GAAP loss. First, in the first quarter, the amortization of unfunded pension liabilities amounted to approximately $1.4 billion. This is a direct consequence of the law that requires USPS pension contributions be invested exclusively in U.S. Treasury debt securities. This has resulted in an outsized mismatch of investment assets and liabilities that are subject to inflation adjustments, particularly disastrous in periods of negative real rates of interest as recently experienced. Other independent agencies like Amtrak and TVA are not subject to these limitations. And a recent Inspector General report found that if postal retirement funds had been invested in a plain vanilla 60-40 stock bond portfolio, our almost $100 billion of retirement funds deficit in 2022 would have been an $800 billion surplus. Let it sink in, okay? Because of the law that requires to invest in U.S. Treasury securities, which are mostly at most medium term, we have had to record sizable losses that we have no control or management over. Second, the Postal Service remains saddled with paying a disproportionate share of Civil Service Retirement System, or CSRS, costs. These are for postal employees who work for a predecessor organization, the Post Office Department. A recent OIG report noted that the Postal Service is expected to cover the full cost of CSRS benefits, while other federal agencies are not. If OPM used more modern actuarial methods, the Postal Service would have roughly $100 billion more in CSRS fund. And these are funds that we contributed, okay? These were not given to us by the government. The DFA plan assumed that CSR reform could be effectuated by the executive branch. About an hour or so ago, the Office of Legal Counsel issued a press release saying that, no, if this are to be changed, they would require legislative action. I would submit this is an injustice, the way the Postal Service has been saddled. These two factors alone accounted for nearly 80% of our recorded losses last year. So when you talk about $6 billion of losses, you got to take into account that 80% of them were by things that we did not control. I urge you to read the two OIG reports that I cited. One is dated April 26th of 2023, and the other one January 8th of 2024. They're extremely informative and lay out exactly the problem that I just described in detail. Now, third factor inflating the Postal Service's expenses is our workers' compensation obligations. The OIG has also noted on a different report that absent legislative changes, the organization is limited in its ability to adopt cost-saving initiatives that are often used in private industry. These expenses total about $1.6 billion annually. If the Postal Service could adopt some of the best practices used by private sector, the OIG estimates that potential savings are over $300 million annually. Furthermore, as if this wasn't enough, under GAAP, the reported workers' comp liabilities on the books are adjusted by changes in interest rates. In the first quarter of 2024, it resulted in a non-cash expense of $1.2 billion. And I urge you to read another report from the OIG of May 26, 2023, that goes into great detail as to this, frankly, travesty. Now, these are complex issues, but they're critical to evaluating the Postal Service's financial performance. In closing, while our finances have improved, as shown in the first quarter, we estimate a full-year controllable loss of $800 million, but that is down from $2.3 billion loss in 2023. And by the way, over the last 2 or 3 years, not only have inflation hurt our pension returns because of the negative real rates, but also has impacted our operating results in a tremendous way. 70% of our costs are salary and benefits, and they're subject to COLA adjustments. Another 10% are transportation costs, and they're subject to inflation, as we all know, from fuel prices. And we've been fighting that. And this result that I've cited, which is an improvement, have taken into account dealing with those inflationary impacts. As I noted earlier, in implementing a restructuring of this magnitude, there will be times when service falls short of our standards. But the Postal Service will move quickly to address them, while our infrastructure is being modernized and our workforce stabilized. Simply put, in my view, the Delivering for America plan is working, but it needs time to achieve its goals. With your help and support, we can continue down this path. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Governor Martinez. Our third witness is Michael Kumbayanda, and he is chairman of the Postal Regulatory Commission, which is the Postal Service's regulator. He has served in that role since January of 2021. He was first appointed to the commission and confirmed by the Senate in January of 19 and was confirmed for a second term in December of 21. Prior to his appointment, he served with the U.S. Postal Service Office of Inspector General and the House Oversight Committee. Mr. Kumbayanda, you are recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Paul, and members of the committee. The Postal Regulatory Commission is a micro-agency with a substantial mission, providing transparency and accountability of the U.S. Postal Service. The Commission recently issued its compliance determination for 2023 and will soon issue 2 more reports. The research is alarming. Service performance, finances, and efficiency are moving in the wrong direction. These findings should raise concerns now with elections scheduled for this fall and mail ballots expected to play a role. In Georgia, Virginia, Texas, and other states, service quality has continued to decline. Individual letters and cards mailed within the Atlanta area, which should arrive in a generous 2-day window, met that standard only 16% of the time in March. Atlanta and Richmond have new processing plants under a 2021 strategy, which was meant to make the Postal Service self-sustaining and high-performing. 3 years later, the Postal Service does not appear to be closer to meeting those goals. While some disruption should be expected with these network changes, the bottleneck in Georgia does suggest some underlying problems. Hopefully, service in Atlanta is an outlier and will rebound soon, but national service is also subpar and trending in the wrong direction. Some context helps in understanding these service problems. First, the Postal Service has relaxed service standards in recent years, which should make it easier to achieve a high on-time percentage. Second, the official numbers may actually undercount delays experienced by mailers and recipients. The postal strategy calls for centralized plants, which increase the time from when a customer gives mail to the Postal Service until the first scan. This can take place in a different state. The Postal Service has also decided to stop picking up mail from some post offices in the evening. The official metrics, therefore, may actually undercount delivery times by days, even when the network is operating smoothly. The Commission is working to understand and address these issues. Some parts of the postal strategy do make intuitive sense, especially at first. One might assume that lower standards, operational changes, and slower service have allowed the Postal Service to cut spending, improve efficiency, and become self-sustaining. They have not up to this point. Costs have not been reduced even though mail volume has declined. Efficiency fell by a historic amount of 4% last year. In 2020, the Commission changed a price cap established by a postal reform law, which had locked the cap into place for 10 years. That new regulation, as well as a reform law in 2022, provided a boost of over $100 billion to the postal balance sheet. With that help and the new strategy, the Postal Service planned to break even in 2023. Instead, the agency lost over $6 billion, with the caveats that Chairman Martinez mentioned this morning. I understand that postal employees are working harder than ever and that postal management remains committed to its present course. The Commission lacks the direct legal authority to stop it. I hope the Postal Service can turn around its performance, and I encourage its leaders to be transparent with stakeholders, Congress, and oversight bodies as they attempt to do so. Voters and election officials, for example, must know the amount of time needed to deliver ballots. Congress created the advisory opinion process as one venue for such transparency. The Commission relies on stakeholder input and detailed analyses by its staff to understand the impact of network changes. Advisory opinions identify potential concerns and offer recommendations for addressing them. Commission advisory opinions in 2021 and 2022 noted concerns that were not fully addressed. These include the potential for late delivery of medications, unrealistic projections of cost savings, and lack of communication with stakeholders. We have seen these issues pop up again in headlines and in data, as well as in the OIG's recent audit of Richmond. A new advisory opinion makes sense as the Postal Service ramps up the national rollout of new processing plants and transportation options. These changes are clearly having an impact on service. Postal leadership has pointed out that the Commission has stopped or slowed down Postal Service's work. While I believe the need for oversight is readily apparent, the Commission has actually streamlined regulation to support the postal ecosystem where that's appropriate. Last year, the Commission approved negotiated service agreements, which are specialized contracts between the Postal Service and its customers, in 10 days on average, despite having a staff of fewer than 100 people. That is fast and flexible regulation where it's warranted. The Commission stands ready to work with postal leadership and stakeholders to preserve the postal system consistent with the law and the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Kumbayanda. Our final witness is Tammy Hull. She is the Inspector General of the U.S. Postal Service. The governors of the Postal Service appointed her to that position in 2018. Prior to her appointment, Ms. Hall served as the Acting Inspector General and the Deputy Inspector General and has served as the OIG since 2005. Ms. Hall, you are recognized for your opening comment.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Paul, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss our work. The Postal Service issued its Delivering for America plan 3 years ago and is now accelerating network changes across the country. The OIG is committed to keeping pace with these changes and providing robust oversight and transparency. We've completed several audits related to the plan and more are in progress. We're finding that as the Postal Service implements these changes, significant operational issues are arising that affect service to customers and take time to resolve. Our work is showing that better local coordination and execution could likely prevent some of this disruption. Last September, we issued an audit examining the initial sorting and delivery centers, or S&DCs, in Florida, Georgia, Texas, Massachusetts, and New York. Overall, we found these facilities operated successfully, but there were opportunities for improvement. The Postal Service did not communicate sufficiently with high-volume customers, often providing information at the last minute. In addition, some facilities opened before renovations were complete, so employees had to work around construction projects. Transportation changes and also delayed delivery to P.O. Box customers, leading to complaints. The Postal Service launched its first Regional Processing and Distribution Center, or RP&DC, last July at an existing plant in Richmond, Virginia. Our recent audit of the repurposed facility found significant problems. Prior to making changes, the Postal Service had not addressed staffing and other issues that we had raised in our 2021 and 2022 audits of the facility. Transportation planning for the new facility was also insufficient, leading to a 700% increase in extra trips. In addition, on-the-ground operations did not always match the new integrated plan for the Richmond plant and its supporting facilities. This was partly due to inadequate coordination with local management and ongoing changes after the launch. Local management said they did not fully understand the new mail flow within the facility and were not solicited for input. The Postal Service also did not hold public input meetings for the Richmond changes. We examined whether the Postal Service was required to provide public notice and found its policy was unclear. The Postal Service said its decision not to provide public notice complied with its longstanding interpretation of the law, but this interpretation was not documented in policy. 3 months after the opening of the RP&DC, the Postal Service made an additional change within the region covered by the Richmond facility. For the first time, it implemented its local transportation optimization initiative. Under this initiative, at some post offices, collection mail received throughout the day is held overnight to reduce the number of trips and associated costs. In the Richmond region, 86% of the affected zip codes were in rural areas, potentially leaving these rural customers with slower service. Following implementation, first-class mail on-time service performance in the Richmond region dropped about 21 percentage points to 65%. Unfortunately, we cannot isolate how much of the service decline resulted from this initiative compared to other events, such as peak season. As the Postal Service expands this transportation initiative to other locations, we will monitor it and other network changes. We have audits currently underway of the rollout of new RPNDCs in Georgia and Oregon and additional SNDCs, and we will evaluate implementation challenges that could both reduce service and increase the risk that the Postal Service may not achieve its potential savings. We also continue to focus on service performance more broadly, and recently reviewed clusters of facilities in Missouri, Minnesota, North Dakota, California, and Washington, D.C. to evaluate service issues and recommend solutions. Additionally, following media reports of undelivered packages, we visited a South Houston facility in January and found 384,000 pieces of delayed mail and mostly packages. The Postal Service had moved operations from another plant, but staffing, equipment, and logistics were not aligned with the new workload. Our recent report details these issues. Another critical focus area for us this year is the Postal Service's readiness for the November election, particularly as network changes are made. We plan to release our election mail readiness audit in late summer and will conduct a separate audit of Postal Service ballot processing during the November election. As we did in 2020, OIG auditors and investigators will make hundreds of visits to delivery units and plants around the country to observe operations and flag problems. We want to help ensure the Postal Service continues to deliver for voters. Thank you for the opportunity to share our work, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Well, we have a lot to unpack here, and we look forward to having a very open discussion in the time we have remaining together. Postmaster General DeJoy, as we have heard, and you mentioned and others have heard, the Postal Service made a number of changes in two very large facilities in Richmond, Virginia, as well as Atlanta, Georgia. Unfortunately, that implementation, as we heard from Ms. Hall, has caused some problems and service disruptions during that time. I have the chart here for folks who are in the audience. One-time service declined after the Postal Service implemented changes in Richmond, and unfortunately is still unreliable, as you can see from the chart here. Atlanta is particularly problematic, where we saw service plummet. In fact, inbound first-class mail has dropped to only 36% on time, 36% on time. In addition, cost savings have not been realized. Estimated the Richmond facility, for example, incurred about $8 million in unexpected cost as a result of some of these changes. So my question for you, sir, is given these service delays and increased cost, is the Postal Service still moving forward with these planned network changes? And do you think it's prudent now to perhaps try to evaluate exactly what happened in these two locations to make any changes that may be necessary before you continue to roll it out on a nationwide basis?
Yes, first of all, you're correct in regards to the service deteriorating. We recognize that. We apologize to the constituents that have received that service. But in the long term, if we don't make these changes, that will be every day, everywhere around the nation. The problems that we are having with regard to both facilities being open have nothing to do with the fact that we want to process packages with a conveyor rather than by hand, that we want to fill trucks and have it run 90% full instead of 30% full. That has nothing to do with how we want to make one trip 300 miles away to pick up no mail versus 2 trips a day to pick up no mail, and a host of other operational and strategic initiatives that we have in the plan that enable us to compete with private industry, because that's the law that you all have us operating under. To the extent of the problems that manifested, This is an organization that has not engaged in change in over 15 years, right? We are taking longstanding broken practices and a less than engaged management style and trying to transition from losing $137 billion over the last 15 years to competing with a FedEx or UPS, to operate like a FedEx or UPS. The issues that we had here were, in fact, management issues on the ground, were, in fact, employee attendance issues, were, in fact, basic management tactics that now that the organization is engaged, I am quite confident, I see it. I see the whole team getting better, understanding the transition that we have to make, committing more to the transition that we have to make. And I say, sir, we don't have another choice but to carry on. It is a good plan. It's a simple plan, right? We have $20 billion worth of deferred maintenance. That's what we're fixing.
Postmaster General, if I just, I understand that change is very hard, especially in a very large organization. It's incredibly difficult. The point that I'm making is that we look at these two facilities with the changes that you've made that have had disruptions and problems. You said that's going to happen throughout the system in the long term, yet we're not seeing that currently in these others. We're seeing these two particular facilities with these changes are having this kind of impact. I'm not against change. You and I have had that discussion before. Change is good, but if you're starting to see that kind of impact with these changes at these two facilities, is it time just to pause a little bit and say, okay, what do we need to tweak? What do we need to change? That's not going to result in this. I'm not going to bury my head in the sand and say, you got to stay in the status quo. We know that's not working.
I understand what you're asking me now. And, sir, we have paused, we have changed, we have reorganized, we have committed additional resources. I have taken my foot on and off the pedal as appropriate to capitalize on the momentum that we have in making a change, the time period that we have before we run out of cash, but recognizing some of the weaknesses that we have in deploying. And I'm very sensitive to that and have stopped many initiatives. There were a few more plans supposed to roll out this year, but also within the organization, some of the local things. These plants will succeed. We're 3 months, 4 months into Atlanta. We moved almost 2,000 people from 10 locations around the city into one, right? We went from processing packages by hand to doing 1 million a night, right? Richmond, I had a conversation with the OIG last week. She went to Richmond. There's a different attitude within the organization there in terms of learning how to process using in a refurbished plant, using the proper tools, using the proper instruction. That was void. That is part of what we're trying to rebuild here. Engagement with our workforce, standard management practices. But we're not doing this blindly with an intent to destroy service.
No, I would never imply that, but I would say, so I want to just say, I heard you say that you are slowing things down. You are taking a look to see as those numbers improve, could we have transparency? As those numbers improve, which you contend will happen with your changes in both Richmond and Atlanta, until we see that, you're slowing down the implementation around the country. Is that an accurate
I would not
restatement?
have construction underway. I am mindful of the transition to avoid circumstances like that, and that's how I will deploy myself. Those two plants, Richmond and Atlanta, and the whole Georgia area, will be the finest running parts of the organization very shortly. All right, and we have to allow time to transition. There are consequences. I did not create this problem that exists or this trajectory that exists there, but we have to move out, and we're very, very mindful of this, and we'll put every effort to stop that from happening.
Great, thank you, thank you. The Postal Service recently made another change that's causing issues, and that's the local transportation optimization. Inspector General Hall, you mentioned that in your opening comments, and the change was implemented in Richmond, which the Postmaster General mentioned, but your office published a report yesterday, which you referenced as well, showing it a contributed service declines there. Briefly, because I'm running out of time, does this change have concerns for you, particularly in rural areas, which are tends to be folks that are most vulnerable to these kinds of changes?
Yes, we did issue the report yesterday. We found that when the Postal Service implemented this in October, that service declined by 21 percentage points in the majority of the zip codes that were impacted by this local transportation optimization, the vast majority were in rural areas. So we have some concerns. We'll be continuing to look at that, but right now that was the first one that had been implemented, and we saw that the service decline was most significant in those rural areas.
Great. We'll explore that further in remaining time. Ranking Member Paul, you're recognized for your questions.
Mr. DeJoy, the post office, I guess, before postal reform was losing about $1 billion a quarter, about $4 billion a year. Now it's
more than
estimated
that,
to lose, maybe $1.5 billion a quarter, or about $6 billion this year. So, it doesn't sound like a whole lot of success with people talking about, going in the right direction. The question is we've known for, I don't know, a decade, 2 decades, that what the post office sells is diminishing. First-class mail. It's a granted monopoly, but it goes down every year, and I think last year it went down 9%. So you've got a declining revenue source, that you make money from, and then you decided to add 125,000 jobs that were part-time jobs and didn't have all of the ramifications of government employment, which are often 50% more expensive than part-time jobs. Why, in a sort of a failing environment of declining sales and perpetual debts, just into the future as far as the eye can see, would you want to add more government employees?
Yeah. So first of all, the first year I got here, we lost $9.5 billion. The year before that, we lost pretty much about the same. The losses over 7 years were over $90 billion. To your point on, and we've had this discussion, to your point on why convert people, because it wasn't working, sir, in the environment. We were in the middle of the pandemic. Right, we had about 60% availability of employees. The management at that particular time treated these people as disposable people, right? We had significant overtime in the middle of the pandemic and trying to move forward. And I have a growth plan, and it's growth in the package business. And in fact, we are growing in the package business. But I've converted 150,000 people to full-time positions because that was the right thing to do in this evaluability to bring stability to the organization.
So basically adding significant costs in an era of perpetual debt.
No, because at the end, because of the stability, right, and because of the attrition rate that we have in the organization, okay, I'm about 20,000 people less than what we had when we came in here. I'm 50 million hours less to do more business today than when I walked in the door. Okay, that's operational management principles, sir. Okay, that's an obvious if you're not in this type of environment, right? It's something that we had to stabilize the workforce. We will continue to hire and staff. Right now, in that we have 30,000 less pre-career people, 20,000 more full-time people, and the stability in the organization. For the peaks, when I got here, we were hiring 40 and 50,000 people for peak. We hired 8,000 last peak, and we did 133 million more packages than the peak before.
And the debts continue to mount. I don't see a whole lot of change. This 10-year projection is rosy on things, but the immediate debts are year-on getting worse.
Now, sir, we have taken over, so that 50 million hours is like 4 billion, over two. What is it? It's like $5 billion, a couple of $1 billion out of transportation, and we've grown our revenue significantly. 6.9 billion.
So private corporations face these kind of problems, and when they do, they don't add to their labor costs. They try to adjust. So if you're in Washington State and you have union labor and it's costing you too much, you expand into South Carolina and you hire non-union labor. It's sort of the same principle with government unions. Your costs are 70–80% is labor. Yeah. You compare yourself to UPS, which is also unionized. They're about 50% cost of labor. FedEx, non-unionized, about 38%. So everybody admits that the labor cost is a big function of the problem, not only in the immediate labor cost, not only in the immediate labor cost, but in the pensions, as Mr. Martinez pointed out. But those are labor costs because they're, you have a bigger labor force, you're going to have bigger pension liabilities. But Mr. Martinez, in the private world, you have to account if your pension is short and you're running a private company and you have to make up for the pension with revenue from your company. You count that, right? You count that in how your company is doing for the year.
Right now are defined contribution plans. They're not in defined benefit plans, which is what we have here. okay?
So you wouldn't
it's
add more
different in private
people, if you were in
sector.
private business, you wouldn't add more people to an undefined, you'd add them to a defined benefit because you don't want unlimited costs, you
No,
want
the defined
limitation
benefit
on
is when
costs.
you're obligated to pay a certain amount to the employees.
Right.
Most private sector companies today are defined contributions,
Right.
okay?
But
So
the
that's a
thing
big
is
difference.
but by adding 125,000, you're adding to the problem. You're not actually taking
by
away
adding
from the problem.
125,000.
By adding permanent employees that will
Well,
be in
that's
the
a
same
different
sort of
question.
plan.
That's an operating question. That's
Well,
not a
but it's
that's
part
not a
of the
pension
it's part of
question.
the problem. You have a pension problem, right? An underfunding of the pension, and you have
We
to
have a
account
problem
for it.
created by government on us.
You have an underfunded pension, and so you have to account for it, but you're adding more people onto that traditional pension. So we have a pension problem in Kentucky, and it's the same kind of thing. It's the defined benefit versus defined contribution. Most people get what they put in. They don't just sort of get an amount on and on and on. You get what you put in based on the contribution. But you are not changing that model. You're adding more people to that
But
model.
the pension model was thrust on us.
I know,
It-
but
it
you're
was not
adding,
us who,
you're adding 125,000 new people to the pension model. So you
that's a
complain
different
about the
question. That's an
pension model,
operating- that's a-
but you're adding employees to it. So I don't think you're making your situation any better, and it's not what a private corporation would do.
Well, a
The
private
other- the other-
corporation is not obligated to be in every single delivery point in the United States.
And most private
And that-
corporations don't
and that-
have a monopoly either. So,
and that
you know,
grows-
there is
whoa,
that
whoa.
as well.
A monopoly
So-
that is declining.
But here's my point. When you get to the pensions being a problem and you say most of this is generated by pensions and past pensions and this was all thrust upon you, that's fine, but you're adding people to that problem. So when you add 125,000 people to it, you are making your problem worse, not better, in the long run. So in our state, what we do is we're hiring people with a different pension plan. They give to a 401K and they're going to get what they put into it.
Exactly.
And that's how you convert. But that's what you should be doing. You should be trying
Right.
to get everybody, you should not hire any new employees. Every year you should get smaller, you should put people into a different type of a pension
We can have a
program.
discussion about that, but we need legislation for that then.
Well, no, you don't need legislation to
For the-
privately contract. You don't need, you had
If
this.
we-
You're
we cannot-
converting from the one thing that actually works at the post office, and that is privately contracting people who are not in the government union. It's the only way under today's rules. I would change the rules. Yes, I would change the rules. I would try to fix your pension. But your other point is that the pension causes so many of these costs, but when you actually look at the pension, you say, well, we have to buy only treasuries. Probably the last year's been the best year for treasuries in the past 10 years.
I'm sorry,
Because interest rate,
I respectfully disagree with
because of
that.
interest rates have risen. This is that you have been in a negative interest environment.
Do you
but
know how,
actually have-
do you know how the Treasury
You
invests?
also have interest rates rising.
Do you know
It's
how-
better than any other year you've
Do
had.
you know how the Treasury invests our pension assets? Do you know? I respectfully
can't-
ask you the question.
I
If
can't
not-
answer the question. I can't.
Okay, I'll tell
I can't
you.
hear you.
We turn over the money, and they basically put it in a ladder portfolio of 15 years. So we're locked into a rate. The OIG report, and you might be able to correct me, I think our average return in 2022 was like 3.4% or something in that area.
Right. That's probably better than it was 5 years ago, would be my guess.
3.4% when inflation is running at 8%.
No, I'm not saying it's
a
great.
loser.
It's still a terrible investment. Nothing makes sense about the pension program. I'm not there to defend
Okay,
your
well,
pension
so
program.
what's your question?
I'm against your pension program, but I'm against putting more people in it. So you don't quite get it. You want to quibble over the
Senator,
pension
the
program
operating-
getting this, but
Senator-
you're adding more people to it. You need to add less people to it, and you need to convert your labor force. It's the only way you can survive. Otherwise, we just keep doling out more massive subsidies to you.
Senator, we have not added 125,000 people. We have less people in our employ than we did before. We attrit 40,000 people a
Your
year.
DFA says you want to add 150,000, and you have added over
I don't know where you're
$100,000
getting
to the
that
government
from.
union.
That's not my plan. And we've used 50 million less work hours, 50 million less work hours this year to do the job. Long range, we will right-size our workforce for the work that we have to do, right? And that is what part of the plan is.
Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with Mr. Martinez, because we're talking about pensions and investments. When you hold a U.S. Treasury and it's at low interest rate and the interest goes up, the value of that bond goes down, correct?
Goes down.
Do you have to recognize that on your income statement, or because you hold these things to maturity, do you not recognize that loss?
We will do indirectly in that the OPM, and not us, not our auditors, calculate actuarially what our amortization of unfunded pensions are. To the extent that our value goes down, then that cost goes up. theoretically, but I don't know. They tell us what it is that we have to put in.
So, again, I'd be surprised if you had to downvalue that because you're holding it to maturity. You're just getting hit by the fact that you're earning a very low rate of return versus what's available in the marketplace. By the way, the comment you made in terms of the $800 billion of lost opportunity, had you invested that in just a normal type of balanced fund, would have also been true for Social Security had we not spent that money and invested that in, I know they didn't exist at the time, but some kind of ETF or some kind of Dow Jones Index fund, we'd have $7 or $8 trillion in real assets, but we didn't do that. We spent the money, it's gone. But that's,
if we had been able to
different
invest
point.
like Amtrak or TVA on a diversified portfolio, that surplus would have been money that we wouldn't have had to put into the pension fund, but rather spend on our capital investments.
So this gets me to my next point, and it's the constraints that the Postmaster General talked about. Basically you're operating and reporting to a 400 or 535 member board of directors here that impose on you certain business conditions that you would not recognize, or you wouldn't operate that way if you're in the private sector, right, Mr. Postmaster General?
Well, we have laws that we need to follow and have different impacts on us, used to protect the monopoly that no longer exists.
Right, so the question I have is, what are those major constraints? Let's get them on the table. What does Congress force you to do that in any kind of rational private sector business you wouldn't do because you keep losing your you-know-what?
Yeah. Well, I think the first part was the was the pre-funding legislation that we worked together to get passed last year.
You did get an infusion. I never would have thought this would happen. I was chairman. $100 billion plus to offload part of that.
That's a perspective that I don't share. Right? It was
a non-cash adjustment to the balance sheet.
Let me finish. Ron.
Sorry.
You relieved the liability.
That was legislation.
By the way, how much of the liability were you relieved of? I'm not up to speed on those numbers. I mean, your total unfunded liability pension was over $200 billion, correct?
We still have the same obligations long-term to pay for our retirement
Not having to
health
recognize
care.
it.
It's just the pre-funding legislation that was passed in 2006, probably the dagger in the heart of the Postal Service between what it did with regard to the pre-funding and also the price fixing that it instituted, that the PRC oversaw, right? That through basic division, you would have seen that. I mean, you were seeing it every year, $10 billion losses,
Yeah,
$20 billion.
we talked about that. Again,
Okay.
that was an insane bill that was passed, what,
Okay,
2006?
but there's a whole bunch of the same
forced
things that
and,
have the consequences
again,
today
that's
that we're trying
that's
to-
the
to
535-member
fix.
genius board
Yeah.
that
I
you
appreciate
reported
the
to.
legislation that you passed, right? That gave us room to move forward. I would have liked to seen CSRS get it signed off. It didn't. I'm moving forward in operational and financial, revenue-producing issues. I think the Postal Service Regulatory Commission needs to be looked at, right, in terms of what their impact and effect. I have a Senate-appointed board, a Senate-appointed commission. These are, I think that this organization is not set up to deal with what this Congress is asking us to do, which is compete in the we have $39 billion worth of mail. It costs us $65 billion to deliver it. The only way to make that up is by driving cost out, potentially
which you're not allowed to do in many cases. I mean,
Right.
I mean, you're constraining what you can do in terms of
grow
cost
in the
saving
package
measures.
and grow in the package market, which we are, and we're driving cost out too. I am hopeful. We've had these short-term issues, but when you go to some of these operations, go look at the difference in Atlanta. Go look at the overall strategy. No strategy existed. This was a randomly deployed, haphazard organization that had no mission. There's a purpose within the organization now. People are engaged in terms of trying to make this work, and the strategy is not that complex. It's simple. Load your trucks.
So again, what Congress does what it always does. I mean, they throw more money at the problem. My guess, when you get a few tens of billions of dollars thrown at you, you can use it to some effective impact.
Listen, I have not. I've asked for that's what I have asked for. I think we have an operational path forward to solve a lot of this problem. If it's not without consequence as we do it, but I'm pretty positive about what everybody's engaged in the organization, including our union leadership.
So again, what I would try and elicit, and can't really do it in 7 minutes, but if you could do it offline, I mean, I would really like to fully understand what those constraints are, and if you really could change the law. Again, I say without affecting service, you're going to affect service. You can't continue to do what we keep doing in a declining market environment. But anyway, I'd like to hear from that. I do have one other question submitted by one of my constituents who actually produced the blue boxes. Apparently, you're going to higher security blue boxes, and they're just asking, are you going to be issuing, I guess, the specs on those, some kind of strategic plan so they can plan on it, so they can deliver those blue boxes to you as a cost-effective manner as possible?
I think we have purchased about 25,000 high-security boxes, and we have a deployment plan, so if you want, I could get with our retail and delivery group and the inspection service.
Okay, yeah, if you could get us in contact with somebody just on the basis
Not
of
somebody who wants to break into them, is it?
Pardon?
It's not somebody who wants to break into them, is it?
I don't think so. I think this is a cooperative type of question. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hassan, recognized for your questions.
Well, thanks, Chair Peters, and thanks to you and Ranking Member Paul for holding this hearing, which is particularly timely for New Hampshire because of the Postal Service's plans to move operations from the Manchester Processing and Distribution Center to Boston over the next year. Granite Staters reach out to my office daily about delivery issues that they are experiencing. This new plan from the Postal Service could exacerbate these issues by leading to more delayed mail deliveries, delayed absentee ballots, and job losses for postal employees, and that is unacceptable. 2 years ago, we passed the Bipartisan Postal Service Reform Act to help the Postal Service achieve financial stability. In addition, Senator Collins and I worked together to help secure $10 billion in relief funds for the Postal Service during the pandemic. Congress took action to allow the Postal Service to achieve its core mission to deliver mail to every customer at least 6 days per week, but the Postal Service's current plan fundamentally lacks a commitment to service. Granite Staters and all Americans deserve a new plan for reliable, timely postal delivery. And this is true whether they live in rural or urban areas, whether they are waiting for a customer's check to come in, whether they're a grandparent waiting for a birthday card from their grandchild, or whether they are waiting for life-saving medications. So let me start with a question to you, Inspector General Hull. A few years ago, the Postal Service hired an additional 150 postal workers in New Hampshire based on an Inspector General report that I requested. I appreciate your partnership on that report and the work of your office. However, as I noted, service issues persist in New Hampshire. I'm particularly concerned that moving critical operations from Manchester to Boston will result in significant delivery delays. I'm also concerned that postal employees will face an impossible choice between commuting to Boston, and for those of you who don't know, this is ranked as one of the worst commutes in the country. You're talking about 2 hours each way for some of these employees at least to be reliably on time at work. It's one of the worst commutes in the country, and so they're going to face this choice to keep their jobs or leave the Postal Service altogether. So based on your observations, Inspector General, from previous consolidations, what can Granite Staters expect when operations move from Manchester to Boston? Specifically, what delays might customers see? And what will postal employees experience?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Hassan, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with your staff on previous opportunities. I can't speak to specifics on what will happen directly in New Hampshire, but I can tell you what we've seen so far. In Richmond, we've seen challenges, particularly in service performance, and there was a real need for a better pre-implementation kind of ground game to get the employees on board so that they can understand exactly what the changes involve and how to get them engaged in supporting the change and working through what those service changes are going to entail. As far as employees go, I don't know how many. I know a little bit about what that facility will be moved from and to, but I don't know how many of those employees will be retained at that local facility, and how many of them will actually have to make decisions that you spoke of on where to go. But I think if the Postal Service can address some of the recommendations that we made in Richmond, we're in Atlanta right now, we'll make some similar recommendations on what the challenges are, and if they can take these lessons learned and really focus on those to really, before they actually implement the change, instead of after and trying to recover from the service disruptions that have occurred.
Well, I appreciate that. I would also suggest that this is not necessarily about getting employees on board. It's about listening to employees. They are the experts in delivering mail. They are the experts in their states. They're the experts. They're the ones who know where a particular address is when somebody writes the wrong address on an envelope. But they are the people who know this area, and you might all start with listening to them about what they think the impacts will be on service being the paramount obligation here. To Chairman Coubeondu, Northern New Hampshire postal customers aren't served by the Manchester facility. They're served in White River Junction, Vermont. Under the Postal Service's plans, operations at the White River Junction facility also could be consolidated. So now we've got Manchester going to Boston under your plan. And here's the plan for White River Junction. It's going to Hartford, Connecticut, 150 miles away. So now we're taking two of the northern New England states, in the northern part of those states, and just taking out any of these processing centers. For Granite Staters in the North Country in particular, the Postal Service is a lifeline. We're still working on getting high-speed internet to them. The roads are not optimal, and cell service often isn't great. So the Postal Service remains particularly important up there, especially when you're talking about the delivery of medication and essential goods. It also connects people, and it is also a critical resource for local businesses who rely on the Postal Service because, no surprise, FedEx and UPS won't deliver up there. So the Postal Service is all we've got. So the Postal Regulatory Commission has the authority to ensure that the Postal Service meets its service obligations. How could the Postal Regulatory Commission use its authority to ensure that the Postal Service meets its service obligations, especially in rural areas like New Hampshire's North Country?
Senator, thank you for the question. I will say that the portion of the law that requires the Postal Service to consult with the Commission as it's implementing service standards is not one that has a lot of teeth. It's a requirement to consult. However, the Postal Service has the direct authority over its own operational and service strategies. As you've seen, they're quite aggressive in terms of exercising their autonomy. However, there are things that the Postal Regulatory Commission can do. The part of the law that has a little bit more teeth is the advisory opinion process, in which the Commission issues an advisory opinion to the Postal Service. These are on-the-record proceedings where stakeholders can come in and lay out some of those issues that you've pointed to that will affect stakeholders. And then the Commission is able to do a deeper dive, take into account all those different positions and issue recommendations. You pointed to medications. During 2021 and 2022, the Commission issued 4 advisory opinions. We repeatedly pointed out these issues. I have to commend our staff. Our tiny staff did a tremendous job, and they identified all of the issues that we've seen, the issues with medications, lack of communication with stakeholders, frankly, over-optimistic forecasts.
Yep.
So I think that advisory opinion process does have some teeth, and a new advisory opinion might be warranted as you see this ramp up of delivering for America. We also have direct authority to approve the service measurement system. I think that's a concern, as I mentioned in my testimony, that we might be actually underestimating the delays in many cases. You hear, stories and also see the statistics heading in the wrong direction. That's something we're actually very interested in taking a look at. And I'll also say we recently opened up a docket to reconsider the rate-making system, and one of the reasons we cited was service performance. That is one of the factors that's in the law as we're conducting this proceeding.
I appreciate that, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. Again, this is about service. The Postal Service was established by our founders and is protected in the United States Constitution because it is not just any private business. It has an obligation of service that is essential to our people and to our economy. Thank you.
Senator Marshall, recognized for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said in list of y'all's testimonies, I'm just reminded that no good deed goes unpunished. And I don't doubt the sincerity of you and your employees wanting to deliver a good product at an affordable price for the American taxpayers. I want to start off with something very positive to report. As you all know, there's a fentanyl explosion going on across this country. And we're losing 300 Americans every day to fentanyl poisoning. We've lost 250,000 Americans to fentanyl poisoning. And now criminals are using the United States Postal Service and other private carriers to send those fentanyl tablets to different locations, including in Kansas. I'm proud to report that your cooperation, the U.S. Postal Service's cooperation with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and their canines, they've been able to capture 66,000 fentanyl pills. I sure hope the other public entities, as well as the private entities, are all cooperating with this effort as well to stop this horrible, horrible epidemic. My first question or comment would be to the Postmaster General. The city of Olathe is perhaps the fastest growing city in Kansas. It has a thriving downtown. Unfortunately, there's a railroad right through the middle of downtown and a very busy postal office there as well. The city would like to move that post office somewhere else, outside of town probably, and they're willing to throw some money at it as well. And so far, they've met resistance from that. I'm sure this is a blip on your screen, Mr. Postmaster General, but are you aware of the situation in Olathe?
No, I'm not. But I'm aware of other requests like this from other places.
Well, we would sure appreciate your office taking a little closer look at it. Again, you have a city that's willing to cooperate, help pay for part of the situation. I think your operations would be more efficient if your drivers weren't coming in and out of that traffic jam as well.
Yeah, I'll take a look into it, sir.
Thank you. The next question is going to be directed towards the Inspector General Hall as well. As you may know, the services in the Kansas City metro area are of great concern as well. What I understand is maybe a third of the mail is late, taking over 3 days. I believe that's your report as well. Are you familiar with that report in Kansas City, and what were your conclusions concisely?
Yes, what we saw in the Kansas, Missouri area, and we did some work, I think it's been about probably 7 or 8 months ago now, but a lot of the problems were related to staffing and an inability to retain staff for in the delivery units primarily. And so as a result, some of the routes weren't being delivered every day because they just were understaffed in some of those locations. And some of it is due to the inability to hire quickly, and also the challenges in the labor force where wages have increased, maybe in some places faster than the Postal Service wages.
Okay. I'm going to go through some numbers here, and I wish I could give them to you. You may want to write them down, but in 2001, the Postal Service employed 775,000 people, and we're delivering 103 billion first-class mail a year. 775,000 people, 103 billion first-class pieces of mail. In 2013, your numbers bottomed out for employees of 491,000, and 65 billion first-class mail were delivered. And then in 2023, 525,000, so increased numbers from the decade before. 525,000 employees and 45 billion pieces of mail. So I know you point here that they have a problem in a particular area hiring folks, but yet the number of people employed by the post office are going up. The volume is less than half of what it was before. And I certainly understand the economic ramifications, but can you connect those two pieces in any way, shape, or form?
It looks like a disconnect, right? And I think the challenge is that the Postal Service is everywhere. They're in every neighborhood every day. And so you may see big, broad nationwide numbers that look like one scenario, but when you go and that's one of the reasons that we do a lot of really focused local work, because every city, every location in America kind of has its own story. And so what we saw, the nationwide numbers are exactly what you gave, but in Kansas City specifically, they had real challenges in hiring in that location. So sometimes you see areas that are not having problems, we're not having, Postal Service not having problems filling positions, but in other places, it's been a real challenge.
So Postmaster General, if we could follow up on that. In the private sector, I would assume that they would move some employees to there. They would figure out a way to make sure that customer service is continued. What ties your hands from it, or what's your assessment of the situation?
Two things. In 2001, with 775,000 people, we didn't have packages.
Okay.
Today, we have a whole bunch of packages that we're moving around the nation, right? With regard to rural areas on delivery, it's pretty simple. An age-old labor position called a rural carrier associate is probably one of the most ill-defined, worst jobs in the nation. It's the way we staff, according to different rules, that you have to work everybody's off day and so on and so forth. So we've been making aggressive efforts to try and change that process, use the formula method that enables us to rebalance people, and we've done a lot of work in that. But
Well, with all due respect, I'm not sure I would call Kansas City metro area rural.
well, rural carriers with regard to what our definition of rural is.
So Kansas City is considered a
There
rural?
could be areas out in the Kansas City area that would be a rural
Okay,
carrier.
last question to the Postmaster General. Is there a disconnect between your all's leadership positions and the execution of your plans? Do you feel a significant resistance from the political appointees or the non-political appointees? Why are we struggling here?
I think there's just there's a disconnect from me and the organization when I walked in, right? Because I'm trying to bring in commercial practices as required by law to deliver mail and packages in an integrated manner and cover our cost, right? And we had no effort, no practice that did that. We had a random, haphazard, unmanaged system. It took a long time to get the manager. I've reorganized probably 13 times since I've been there in different types of positions to find a balance. And I have a leadership team that's very much engaging. And now we're bringing it out into the field. And we have made significant gains. We delivered the COVID test kits to 165 million addresses across the country within 2 days, right, in a time of crisis. We've made significant gains. As we engage in this change, it is plant by plant, person by person, driver by driver that has to take on a new way of working, a new way of thinking, okay? And it's easy to criticize when you show up at the crime scene and see the damage, okay? But the path there is long, and his people are working very hard to change Heinz and Martz in terms of how we perform. And they are, in fact, doing that. I'm well qualified to recognize an organization that is changing how it executes, okay, versus the way we were stagnant and letting things just happen to us. So that's why I'm optimistic about the changes. It's probably to no one's satisfaction in this room or in this town, but it's what we got. This is the plan we're going with. We're moving forward, and it is, in fact, having an impact, and it will make the Postal Service better.
Senator Rosen, recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. And I'm going to quote you, IG Hull. Every location has a story. You just said that. So I'm going to talk about the story of Reno, Nevada, Northern Nevada, Mr. DeJoy. I'm extremely concerned about your proposal to downsize the only postal processing and distribution center in Northern Nevada, one of only 2 in my entire state. Your proposed plan includes transferring mail processing operations from Reno out of state to California, which will negatively impact mail delivery service for Nevadans. Under your proposal, if one of my constituents in Reno were to mail a birthday card to her mother who lives on the other side of town, the letter is going to be driven 130 miles over to Sacramento, California, and then sent 130 miles back to Nevada to reach its final destination. And so I'd like to understand what analysis you undertook to conclude that moving mail processing from Reno to Sacramento would actually benefit Nevadans. Your staff has continued to assert that your plan won't undermine delivery standards for Nevada. but they haven't been able to explain how this is possible or provide me any of the data you've collected. And per what you just said, your team, they came and met with us, but they have not engaged with stakeholders in Nevada. I've talked to every one of our city councils. They have yet to receive data, and Senator Cortez Masto, myself, and Congressman Amodei didn't receive it either. So I'd like to ask you a few yes or no questions, please, because my time is limited. Mr. DeJoy, the Postal Service standard for receiving and delivering mail in the Reno area is 2 days. The Postal Service is already failing to meet this standard, with outbound mail and service in Reno currently averaging about 4 days. I point this out because in order to take local mail from Reno to Sacramento and back to Reno as you propose, your trucks will need to go through the Donner Pass. I hope you're familiar with that. It's on I-80. It's the only way to get through Reno to Sacramento, which is subject to some of the most extreme weather conditions in the contiguous United States, with over 33 feet of snow annually, 100-mile-per-hour winds, and treacherous conditions during wildfire season. So, Mr. DeJoy, yes or no, do you happen to know how many days per year, on average, the Donner Pass is closed due to extreme weather conditions?
Why would I know that?
Well, you're the Postmaster General, and you're saying that you're going to go over this. So let me tell you, there were 15 road closures for over 37 days of closures just last winter alone. So, yes or no, before you proposed your plan to move out of Reno, did you collect data on the potential impact to mail service from severe weather conditions on Donner Pass? Yes or no, please?
Yes, within the organization, we
So
would have
can I
considered-
have that data? Your team has refused to give that to us. We are the Oversight Committee. I believe that the United States Congress has a right to this
I will give you
information.
the data that we have. I'll get with the team and
Thank
send you
you.
the data we have.
So how do you plan to get the mail? Maybe you want to tell us how you plan to get the mail from Reno to Sacramento and back to Reno when there's only one route. I say one route, I-80, to take that 260-mile round trip when it's closed on an average of 37 days per year.
Let me start with the fact that we're investing significantly in the Reno facility to repurpose it for what we feel is the modern-day need for Postal Service. The mail that we're moving, only 10% of it. We're only moving
So you want to
outbound-
sacrifice 10% of my folks in rural Nevada.
We don't think we're sacrificing.
I have rural Nevadans, veterans, and seniors that still rely on this. That 10%, if you're in the 10%, it's everything. So a standard contingency plan here, Mr. DeJoy, is not going to work. The extreme conditions in Sierra Nevada mountains require you to undertake an extensive analysis to ensure all Nevadans, even that 10%, get their mail on time. You don't get to sacrifice those living in my rural areas or subject to harsher weather in the name of cost savings. The Postal Service has an obligation to deliver to everyone. Let me ask you this. Before developing this plan to downsize the Reno facility and transfer operations to California, did you analyze how your proposed plan would impact Nevada seniors? And can you provide me that data here today? Yes or no, please?
We have a process to analyze the movement of mail and
Have you done one that would impact my Nevada seniors?
look at that. We treat every delivery point the same.
Do you have one for Nevada seniors? So you didn't look at how it would impact my seniors. That's unacceptable. If you did, I expect to see that data as soon as possible, hopefully by the close of business today, please. I believe that I have to assume the reason I don't have the data is because you instructed your staff not to provide it to me when we requested it last month.
I think that's very inaccurate and presumptuous.
It wasn't provided to me when I asked for it last month, and it wasn't provided when we asked for it last
I
week.
didn't direct my staff to do anything with regard.
Fair
In
enough.
fact, you've been briefed many times.
So
and your staff
what
has been
about the
briefed.
impact of your plan on Nevada's veterans? We have over 225,000 veterans in Nevada. Yes or no, did you collect
Veterans
data
live.
on the
They will
impact in
get
Nevada
their mail
veterans?
delivered. Wherever their veterans live, this should have no impact.
So
we're
will
not
you
saying-
provide me that data? Will you provide me the data? Because if you didn't have
We
it?
can provide our plan as to how
So
the
you
mail will be
didn't
transported. and
specifically see
transferred.
how it would impact Nevada veterans. That's actually unacceptable to me as well. Again, asked this
If a veteran
information
lives
over
at
a month
delivery
ago.
point in Nevada, okay,
Nevada. It's Nevada, sir. Please say it correctly. It's Nevada.
If a veteran lives at a delivery point, our intention is to give him the mail in a timely service that we have.
You're
in
not
terms of
giving them in the
standard.
timely service now. So what makes you think
That's-
it's going to go in 4 days? I hope to see the data by the end of the day, please. Mr. DeJoy, an Inspector General audit showed that the Postal Service implemented the same changes to a data processing and distribution center in Virginia, and service performance was not even included as a measure of success. So this time around, did you conduct any analysis on how your proposed changes would impact mail delivery service time specifically in Northern Nevada? Yes or no, please?
Those are two separate operations and separate types of
So
transactions.
I'm assuming it's
Richmond-
no. So you didn't feel that you had a due diligence to understand how Nevada's senior citizens, veterans, small business owners, and rural communities who depend on the post office for their lives and livelihoods.
Senator, we intend to meet the service standards.
You're not meeting it now, and you've refused,
we
you have
intend to
not
meet the
provide
service
us the data of what you've made this assessment on. I hope to see that as quickly as possible, and I'd like to move on to the next question. Well, actually, I have 10 seconds. I will yield, and we'll wait for the second round. Thank you.
Senator Langford, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's incredibly complicated. There's a lot that's going on. And I had a conversation with someone sitting at a table last week that complained to me about, where are we at, 67 cents at this point for a first-class stamp. And they complained to me about the cost of that. And I said, I tell you what, I'm going to hand you a letter, and I'm going to hand you 67 cents, and I'd like for you just to take this to somebody in Anchorage, Alaska for me. And they just smiled and said, point given. So the complications of this is immense. I'm also amazed, as I have listened to other parts of the dais today, about a $4 billion loss for the post office possibly, or maybe up to $6 billion, realizing that today this Congress overspent $4 billion. That's our current rate of burn a day right now. So it's always interesting to me when we in Congress start criticizing any entity for overspending and where things are going, because we have our own challenges on that. So saying all that, this is complicated. I get that. What I'm always grateful for are specific solutions. Mr. Martinez, you brought a set of specific solutions to us on how to be able to handle debt and investing. Quite frankly, if the post office was allowed to be able to invest the same way just for federal and retirees are able to invest, this would be very different. But the post office has a very different standard than what federal retiree benefits actually have on it for the investment. Those are specific solutions. I appreciate that. I do have a couple things just to be able to bring up, though, because as we walk through all of these different issues, I'm trying to identify when this gets better. We've talked about Richmond, we've talked about Atlanta and the decline in the service turnaround, we've talked about the increased cost on it. For the service turnaround time period, Mr. DeJoy, I know you've said over and over again, give us a little bit more time, the service will get better on it. What do you anticipate? Just take Atlanta for an example, because I've got Tulsa and Oklahoma City, there's Fayetteville, there's others that impact Oklahoma. They're about to walk through this process. Is it an expectation that every one of these locations will see a decline and then it will increase as far as the delivery time period?
I expect Atlanta, Richmond, we've opened up other RPDCs, and they have not been as consequential. I expect these operations to be stabilized coming into the summer, into the summertime. There are other aspects of things that we're doing that impact this, transportation initiatives to stop running empty trucks, 50,000 empty trucks around the country, and so forth. So there are a lot of things coming together that will prove out this model is in fact it will in fact work. With regard to, so that's what I think, combined with coming up on the election, I expect that we will slow down on a lot of the moves, continue with the construction site. These MPAs that we're talking about, Reno, Tulsa, which are all will get investments into them to more appropriately serve the community and package industry and package business and so forth. Will most likely, we're collecting all the data to put our project plan to roll out these transitions around 40 locations, and most likely will not happen until the end of the first year. Nobody's going to have to commute to Boston. Nobody's going to have to commute to I forget where we're going in
Oklahoma City, yeah. Fayetteville.
Oklahoma City. And we're putting money into these facilities that have significant deferred deferred maintenance.
So give me a little more specifics on the timeline, because you're saying because of the election, there's going to be a pause to be able to make sure we get through all the election delivery.
These are 40 sites. They're smaller mail moves. We've done this in the past. This is separate than the rollout of the network in Atlanta and so forth. This is just picking up outgoing mail, moving it to a place where we can consolidate all the outgoing mail that goes around the country, and refurbishing the facilities and make them more appropriate for today's business that we're going to be doing. So these are smaller moves. We don't expect to move people. Atlanta was moving like I said, 1,500 people out of 10 plants.
So timeline, when you said you're pausing this, the changes based on the elections.
We're going to collect all the stuff.
and
We'll put a project plan together for all these sites, and most likely any of the mail move work will start after the first of the year. The construction might start earlier on these locations.
So I've heard that there's no change in FTEs except by attrition in some of these locations in that.
Yeah. There's
Tell
no
me- Tell me
change.
how that works.
Yeah, so as I said, we attrit 40,000 people a year. We stop the hiring, and the workforce comes down. I expect in these locations, I expect our package business to grow. We're not asking anybody to move. This is the way the format is put together. But I expect that we will attrit our labor down to the level that we need if it goes down. But I'm also expecting new demands and services that will in fact grow. We have a higher turnover rate on our pre-career, but we're not going to chase people out of these facilities.
The percentage in these locations that are experiencing change of supervisory to non-supervisory employees, will that percentage change?
Say that again, sir.
The percentage of change, the ratio of supervisory employees and non-supervisory employees in these changes, will there be a difference in the ratio there?
No, I think those ratios stay pretty, they're pretty memorialized in terms of how we operate. Other than for vacancies or inability to hire, we try and staff to a complement profile, and we'll continue to do that. These are not bad things.
Right. So Senator Paul brought up the issue about insourcing, and I know there's been some areas for the part-time moving to full-time. Understand that based on the career changes on this. On the transportation side, there has been a move towards insourcing on transportation. What's the cost benefit on that for not having outsourcing for some of the transportation area?
I think that the consequence of that is very exaggerated. We run 55,000 trucks a day on a contracted side. We've made significant changes on in terms of our supplier profile. We were having people go out of business every quarter, that we're moving 5,000, 10,000 trucks around the country. That is changing the profile there on the local trips, servicing from processing plants to the new sorting and delivery centers and S&DCs. We are converting to a new driver type, PVO, non-CDL driver, right? So we can train within our own workforce and putting them in straight trucks, smaller vehicles to more appropriately shuttle within the community to serve both the mail and package package business. Is a common practice. And I think in the end of the day, it will be It'll be more reliable. It'll be just as cost effective, and it's the right thing to do with all the transition that we're doing within some of my work complement. Right? We added 500 conveyors. That gets productivity out. We don't need as many hands. Right? I need positives also, and this is a function. And I don't think I've come out of industry. I've looked at our wage rates. I've looked at including the benefits. I know where labor is. I knew where labor was going before I got here. I was in that business, right? So I think that the postal employee can be successful here. The service can be successful here. We just have to change just about everything we're doing, okay, which is what we're embarking on. But I think it will be more reliable in terms of our service and flexibility.
Thank you. Senator Blumenthal, recognized for your questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Mr. DeJoy, I want to focus on a number of local situations in Connecticut where the Postal Service controls property and where it could be more responsive, in fact, has been either non-responsive to me or insufficiently responsive to me and members of our delegation. First, in the town of Ridgefield, There is a specific piece of land behind the United States Postal Service facility. The town wants to use it for overflow parking in the downtown area. Small businesses are struggling to find parking spaces. That lot is empty at every hour of the day. Never seen a car in the lot. We've sent letters, Representative Himes and I, to the Postal Service, which has been non-responsive to date. Are you familiar with these requests that we've made?
No,
Would you respond personally
yeah, I was just in Connecticut.
and make
last week.
available this land to
I don't know,
local
I have to look at, I'm not going to give it, I'll look at it and I'll get back to you. If I
Okay.
can't do it, I'll let you know
Second,
why.
in the town of Litchfield, again, part of a post office parking lot is sought by the town for a temporary construction easement in connection with the development of the old courthouse into a new facility. I gather by the look on your face that you're not familiar with the Litchfield
I'm not-
postal
No,
property.
I'm not,
Again, would you
certainly.
respond to me? Because so far, there has been inadequate response from the Postal Service. In Milford, the town is redeveloping its downtown. As part of that effort, they want to move the post office location and also redevelop the property. So far, the Postal Service has failed to respond to the town or to the developer of the property, and in fact, there's a meeting today of the delegation to discuss the next steps. I know you may not be responsive, you may not be familiar with the details, but if you could respond to me personally about the Milford situation, Litchfield and Ridgefield, and finally in Norwalk. Again, the business community, which is vital to local development and jobs and economic progress, is creating a large plaza next to the United States Postal Service facility as part of the redevelopment of South Norwalk. The city would like to acquire a portion of that land to create a connection to commercial garage. In return, provide the Postal Service with land to create a customer parking lot, which the facility certainly lacks. Very much in your interest, the town's interest, the business community's interest. Postal Service has been radio silent, non-responsive. Would you look into that situation in Norwalk
I'll
and
look
get back to
into-
me?
Yep, I'll look into them all and I'll get back to you.
I want to turn to mail theft and assaults on letter carriers, growing problem in our country in recent years. Last fall, the Postal Service's Office of Inspector General released a report highlighting these very troubling trends, noting that carrier robberies and mail theft are on the rise across the country. In Connecticut, I've heard from postal employees, lots of them, about the serious impacts of assaults, robbery. They're increasingly vulnerable. These attacks have far-reaching effects. I don't need to tell you, hardworking civil servants are afraid to do their jobs. And Americans' confidence in our mail system is undermined. And so I think there has to be action in response. I'm supporting a measure called the Postal Police Reform Act of 2023. It's led by Senators Durbin and Collins, bipartisan. It's a common sense, bipartisan bill that simply clarifies an authority for postal police officers that can help address the threat of violence, assault, and robbery. I'd like to ask you and the Inspector General for your support of this measure, the Postal Police Reform Act.
Yeah, I would say that we have done a lot over the last year with regard to stepping up activities around the country on postal crime, I have 600 postal police officers in the country. That's hardly enough to have any impact on the 260,000 routes and 300 carriers I have running around the country. We use our postal police to protect our facilities, where our people are and the mail is, and I don't have enough of that. I'm stepping up the action on that. There are places where we have 1,000 people and no security. So that's where we're trying to redirect it, but I will read the bill, and, but I have, you're right, there's a legislative requirement that we cannot, patrol the streets, and
Do you think that it remains a problem?
I think that crime in the city streets doesn't.
No, I'm talking about crime against your employees.
Yes.
Your
and we're-
civil servants.
Yeah.
They're being assaulted, are they not?
They are. We are taking significant action. We send our inspectors into cities. We partner with the local police and the local prosecutors, and we do.
Ms. Hull, do you think that the Postal Service is doing enough?
As you mentioned, we did the work and issued the report in September. We identified some additional things that the Postal Service could do to address the mail theft issue. We did not specifically address the postal police problem because we wanted to see more locally what was happening locally in various locations. We followed up. We were just finishing up some work in Queens. We're going to do some work around the country in different local areas to see what the problem really is, because again, kind of depends on each location where the real hot spots are and what solutions might be available there.
Isn't better law enforcement key?
It is, and that's actually one of the things that we talked about in that higher level work. And so some of it, there's local partnerships that are critical to this, as the Postmaster General mentioned. But we're looking into what the postal police situation is when we do the local work.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Carper, you're recognized for your questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, one and all. Thank you for your service to our country, and in some of you in a variety of ways. People say to me, why have I, over the years, been so interested in Postal Service? And it actually goes back to the Vietnam War, when my generation, a lot of folks in my generation were serving in Southeast Asia. And we would fly 12-hour missions off the coast of Vietnam, and about once a week after we're flying, we'd come back and have chow with our crew and call it a day. But once a week, the mail came. It was the best day of the week. And I still have, and for others, veterans who served in a war, and including that war, you know how important it was to stay in touch with your family and friends back home. And the Postal Service did a great job. I want to make sure that the Postal Service has what it needs to continue to do a good job, not just for people in a war situation or a dangerous situation around the world, but right here at home in all 50 states. I was proud of the work that this committee did in the 117th Congress. Happy to be a part of that in order to enact the Bipartisan Postal Service Reform Act, which a number of you provided input to, and we appreciate that. But provided nearly $50 billion with a B, $50 billion in financial relief for the Postal Service over about a decade. The law repealed the burdensome pre-funding mandate for postal workers' retiree benefits, something that I tried to do for years. Under the leadership of this guy right here, we got it done. But the idea of doing that is the right thing to do, but also to help put the Postal Service on a more solid financial foundation and ensure it can fulfill its vital role for generations to come. Starting this year, the Postal Service and the Office of Personnel Management are launching the new Postal Service Health Benefits Program for postal employees or postal retirees and for their families, which will help people integrate their health care with Medicare, something that needed to be done. It will be a significant feat for the Postal Service and for OPM to implement this new program. And Mr. DeJoy, with the first open season beginning later this fall, can you please speak to how the Postal Service and OPM are beginning to prepare or are preparing for this transition? And does the Postal Service feel well equipped to offer enough customer support to employees and to retirees through this transition in partnership with OPM?
Yeah, so I paid a visit over to the OPM director's office and met with the staff there maybe 7, 8 months ago.
Can you bring the microphone closer to you?
I paid a visit over there about 7, 8 months ago to have a kickoff discussion, and then brought the OPM team later to meet with our Deputy Postmaster General, who's also our Chief Human Resources Officer, and they have been working together on the details of this transition, since that particular point in time. And my updates are that everything is moving along well. A little, some potential opportunities in the selection process that we afford the people that sign up for Medicare. But all of that, from my readings and what I'm being informed, is moving nicely along, and we'll be ready to implement.
All right, thank you. I want to shift a little bit and talk a bit about shifting consumer preferences. The Postal Service's highest revenue-generating mail class has been first class for as long as I can remember. And we've seen, as you know, dramatic drops in volume over the years, in part because people have credit cards in their wallets, and we use credit cards to buy stuff and actually pay our bills and so forth. But since 2006, first-class mail volume has dropped by about a little over 50%, 53% to be exact, reaching the lowest volume, I think, since 1968, when I first deployed to Southeast Asia, all those years ago. It's evident that the Postal Service must adapt to shifting consumer preferences to ensure its financial sustainability and its ability to compete with the private sector. The Postal Service has always worked with the private sector companies in order to prepare mail and packages. While the Postal Service has historically excelled at last-mile delivery, as you know, private sector competitors are continuing to expand, they're continuing to innovate, and in many ways have outperformed the Postal Service in getting mail and packages to customers efficiently and at lower costs. My question, Mr. DeJoy, is given this trend, could you elaborate for us on the Postal Service's strategy of diversifying revenue streams to better align with today's customer preferences? And what initiatives or partnerships are being pursued to capitalize on opportunities to bring the Postal Service up to par with private sector competitors and ultimately provide better service to your customers?
Well, I think that you're hitting on the key point. Mail volume dropped, prices got cut in half, prices didn't rise, and we had an expansive network to continue to, an ineffective network to continue to make the deliveries along the standards that we have. The Delivery for America plan is trying to make that network resemble a FedEx or UPS type network, still reach its standards in 5 days, and integrate the mail and package movement together, to delivery. We had 3 different networks in the package in our business. I'm collapsing it to one, and we had a competitive network that was running around our network, getting to our delivery units. We didn't have products that properly matched what the consumer wanted, and didn't create either operational leverage or revenue leverage. We introduced a new product back in July, Ground Advantage, which enabled us to take packages that are over 1 pound in the same network as a first-class network. We're seeing 450% growth in that volume. We did 133 million packages more last peak than we did the year before. And there's other methodologies of integrating and preparing us to reach our last mile, the most magnificent part of the Postal Service, the last mile delivery center, the last mile delivery, route system. And we're trying to effectively reach that with a streamlined, cost-effective, product-oriented service and affordable pricing. And I believe we can. I think we're on our way to capitalize on that, and that's going to be our growth of revenue. I have, besides taking $5 billion out of cost over the next 2 years, I have a $3 to $4 billion revenue goal in the package business.
All right, thank you. Am I done?
Thank you.
I think it's a wrap. Thank you very much.
Senator Ossoff, I'll recognize you for your questions, and also I need to step out to vote real quick. I'll hand the gavel to you until I return.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DeJoy, core job of the Postal Service is to deliver mail and packages on time, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are mail and packages being delivered on time in Georgia today?
No, sir.
Why not?
We have had significant issues in terms of transitioning from 11 plants in the Atlanta area into 3.
Excuse me, could you speak into the microphone, please?
We've taken on a big, Atlanta has been one of our worst, the Georgia area has been one of our worst served areas over the last 10 years, mostly because we had 10, 12 different locations around the Atlanta area.
Mr. DeJoy, I don't want to talk about the last 10 years, I want to talk about the last 3 months.
All right, well,
Do you know, since you made this shift to the new Palmetto facility, what % of outbound first-class mail was delivered on time in Atlanta?
It's a significantly lower number.
Yeah, it's 66%. Do you know what share of inbound mail, first-class mail is delivered on time?
It's probably all a day late. So
Take a guess how much of it's on time.
35%.
You're pretty much there, 36%. 36% of the mail is being delivered on time to my constituents. What is the specific nature of the operational failure?
Well, the specific nature of the operate, we had to move 2,000 people from all these different plants into one location. We have strict requirements as to when they move. It's a big facility that we opened up. We have inbound transportation issues.
Yeah, but you knew it was going to be hard and complicated, right?
Yeah, and we tried to phase it in over several months, which we did, and we're gonna fix it. You're absolutely right.
When is it going to be fixed?
You will start seeing service improve. You should see it start now, and I think we'll get to where we need to be in about 60 days.
Do you think that one of your private sector competitors would have rolled out
Yeah, I
a
think
new?
they had the
Hold on a
same.
second, Mr. Joy. A new system that would reduce on-time delivery to 36% and then say it's going to take months to fix it? Months?
Private businesses and taking on operations of this nature with the resources that we have do in fact have these types of problems.
You
Okay?
don't have months to fix 36% of the mail being
I didn't
delivered on
say
time.
yes,
I've got
but-
constituents with prescriptions that aren't being delivered. I've got constituents who can't pay their rent and their mortgages. I've got businesses who aren't able to ship products or receive supplies. I wrote you on March 14th. Did you get my letter?
My office got.
I didn't write your office. I wrote you. Did you receive my letter?
I have not read your letter.
You haven't read my letter.
I tried to speak to you Friday or yesterday.
You haven't read my letter.
I have.
The mail's not on time in Georgia. I'm a member of the Committee of Jurisdiction. You haven't read my letter. Well, that explains why I haven't received a response to my letter. March 14th, I wrote you with 2 specific questions. What update can you provide regarding the aforementioned reported issues at the Atlanta Regional Processing and Distribution Center in Palmetto? Question 1. Question 2, how is USPS currently communicating with customers in the metro Atlanta area reporting delayed and lost packages? You haven't read the letter?
So letters come in, people put stuff together to answer it and get.
Let me just give you just a friendly piece of advice. You should personally read letters from members of the U.S. Senate Committee that funds and oversees your operations, particularly where you are failing abysmally to fulfill your core mission in my state. And let me be clear, I think postal workers are out there every single day working their hearts out to deliver the mail on time. But if they don't have the infrastructure and the management competence overhead them to make a transition like this without drastically impairing the core function of the Postal Service, everyone in my state is losing. The amount of distress this is causing my constituents is massive. And I want to know what you are going to do, what specific steps you are going to take to fix this within 2 weeks.
So we have engaged over 50 different management executives on site. We're finishing up our staffing at at the remaining 3 locations. We are looking at our truck schedules, revamping our truck schedules. We are stabilizing the operation in terms of our machinery that we have deployed there. We are working better we have special teams down on site working on our docks, and we're working the rest of the transportation aspects of this that are causing a significant amount of problems. And the 2 plants where we did a lot of transfers, within the next 10 days, we should have them fully staffed. We had issues in terms of those transfers, so the team is working very hard, and I can assure you that in the long run, right, that you will have probably the best service in the country.
No, the long run is too long. You've got weeks, not months. You've got weeks, not months, to fix this. And if you don't fix it, 36% on-time delivery, I don't think you're fit for this job. I yield to Senator Butler.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate
You will see
the
gradual improvement.
advocacy on behalf of your Georgia constituents. Thank you all for being here and for your effort. Postmaster DeJoy, I heard you say something. I wrote it down during your exchange with Senator Lankford, and I just want to give you the opportunity to help me understand what you meant. You said, coming up on an election, I expect we'll slow down.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Well, all the activity that we have in terms of transitioning, the transition activity.
I wanted to understand that because, you know, as a state having 40 million constituents that has moved to all-mail ballot is concerning to me. I really want to understand what your plan is. And I know California is not the only state where voters are expecting to get their ballot in the mail. My mother is actually a constituent of Senator Ossoff's, and just this past election cycle did not get her ballot, her mail-in ballot, actually on time, forcing her to go and have to stand in line for 3 hours to vote in person. And so I'd like to understand your plan for what voters should expect from the Postal Service relative to this upcoming election season.
The voters should accept the same good service that they have gotten in every election. Over 98, 99% of ballots get turned around within 2 or 3 days. We've issued reports every year. I've put together a specific infrastructure within the organization that works with all election boards throughout the year. And we deploy extraordinary measures during election time where we run extra trips, we put extra people on site, we have special oversight areas, departments within each area of the election. And you should expect the same good service we've been delivering for the last, since I've been here.
Thank you for that. I just have to note, and I will continue with my line of questioning, but I just have to note there is an acceptance of exclusion that continues to sort of show up in your testimony and your engagement. When you were speaking with Senator Rosen, there was an acceptance of 10% of Nevadans not getting their mail on time, and an acceptance of only 30% of Atlanta residents getting their mail on time, and now we're talking about an acceptance of 2% of our country's voters not getting their ballots on time. So I just want to note a trend and move forward. And I'm going to raise 2 parts of California that probably have never been spoken in a Senate hearing. One is a town called Bridgeport, California, in the county of Mono. Bridgeport has been the only post office in this town for a while, is the only post office in this town. And since February 2023, the post office has essentially been, the facility has been unusable. Now, I may not agree with a number of the political issues and positions that my colleague, Congressman Kiley, might put forward. But he and I are trying to engage, and have been trying to engage your team to figure out how is it that for now more than a year, there has been a facility that's been unusable by a water pipe burst that followed a disastrous snowstorm. It wasn't until Congressman Kiley was urging your office and reminding you that this facility was not in service, that you were then sending out 4 trailers. So talk to me about how the voters in Bridgeport, California can expect the same good service that they have been getting from you when the same good service for last year plus has been a non-functional facility that at this point is operating out of trailers.
Yeah. Well, we have 31,000 centers around the country and $25 billion worth of deferred maintenance, in them, and it's problems in many towns across, and we're working. We have deployed one of the more expansive refurbishment investment strategies that the Postal Service has seen.
I understand, and you have put forth, I think I've listened to you talk about the incredible efforts that you have made to overcome challenging situations as you walked into your position and leadership of the Postal Service, and a lot of it I truly believe is to be commended. I am trying to assess what kind of service I can talk with the folks in Bridgeport that they should expect, given that the facility that has been serving them is less than to be expected from a United States Postal Service facility for the last year. Mm-hmm. For the last year, and here we are, as you noted, coming up on an election season in a state where the ballots are 100% by mail. Mm-hmm. Let me move from Bridgeport and Mono County to the folks, great Californians down in Imperial. Imperial is one of our most southern counties in the state of California. And in February of 2022, maybe it's just the month of February in California, but in February of 2022, a fire rendered, again, the only post office in the town of Nyland, small, majority low-income community, inoperable. After the fire, the Postal Service put out a notice to say that the post office would be closed temporarily and that the office would reopen as soon as it was safe to do so. Mr. DeJoy, would you be surprised to know that 2 years later it's still not safe to do so?
No.
Why is that acceptable?
It's not acceptable, and these are some of the initiatives that we're trying to roll out and fix. If you give me my staff will have wrote down, and I'll get back to you as to I'll look into what the strategies are for that location. Again, we have a massive a quantity of poor conditions in many of the post offices around the country. I
understand, but these are not. I'm not going to assert what the condition of these facilities were prior to these incidents. Yeah. You and your team know that better than I. But February of 2023, there was a pipe that burst. We are in April of 2024, and it is not functioning to serve the people of Mono County.
The post office is closed?
And the post office is running out of 4 trailers. 4 trailers. Mm-hmm. February of 2022, a fire happened. Again, I'm not asserting that this is a part of deferred maintenance obligations. These are incidents that have happened. And the residents of California are about to run into an election season where all of the ballots are delivered by mail. And they don't have any confidence that they're already not getting their prescriptions on time. They're already not getting all of the other conditions that really emanate from center closures. And Mr. Chair, I'm running over and I want to be quick. But I do feel like, again, there is just, I hear you about deferred maintenance. These are incidents that happen and we are 2 and 3 years past those incidents. And nothing is being done that I can tell. to ensure that the service is restored to the level of good that you said that folks should expect with this election season coming up. So I appreciate, again, the effort that you are making, the work that you are implementing in your Deliver for America plan, but there are some Americans that are not getting it delivered, and I think we have to do better. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DeJoy, nice to see you. I want to talk to you about the post office facility in Bering, Missouri. Back in August of this last year, the post office there was closed after severe tornado damage. Missouri is right in sort of tornado alley. It has not reopened since then. So in September, I wrote to you asking about a timeline to have the post office reopened. Your office wrote back later that month and said probably 90 days there would be a timeline announced. We didn't hear anything, so in January, I wrote again with the chairman, actually Chairman Peters. We wrote asking about a timeline. I don't think I've gotten a response to that letter. Here's the Bering post office at the moment. It doesn't exist. So this community, this is a rural community in my state. They don't have a post office at all. And what bothers me is I haven't heard anything about the timeline for getting it rebuilt. So can I just ask for an update on that?
Yes.
Do you have one?
I do not have an update on the Bering.
I'm sorry.
I do not have one, but I will get it to you.
Okay. Can we get one? I don't want to belabor the point here, but because I think we've heard it now from multiple people, but in rural Missouri, you know, this community, I mean, you see it. There's no post office here. They can't get prescription drugs. They can't get their bills on time. They can't get any. I mean, they're just stranded. So I'm frustrated here by the fact that it's been months and months, and I was told 90 days in September, and this is now the middle of April, and here we are. So I'd like to get your help on this for these good folks. Let me ask you then about some delivery issues. In the Kansas City area, we have seen a tripling of casework reports in Kansas City, folks who are saying they're just not getting the mail. I mean, they're not getting it on time. It was so significant, I asked the Inspector General to look into it and to recommend some action items to improve this. I mean, I just had constituents telling me that at the end of March, they were finally getting their Christmas cards. I mean, this is not good. And this has happened in Kansas City. It's also, frankly, happening in St. Louis on the other side of the state. So can you just give me an update on the implementation of the Inspector General's recommendations for improving service in Kansas City, or maybe you know something about the Kansas City situation, and it would be helpful to hear.
As I actually, I don't know where I reported, but right before peak season, we had a major transportation contractor go out of business. They had a big transfer hub in Kansas City. It actually had 8, that we had about 5,000 truckloads of mail and packages going in and out of these places. So we had to distribute that around quickly over several weeks, around 20 locations around the nation, and reroute 5,000 truckloads in and out. Kansas City was not great on service to begin with, and this just complicated the issue. We're starting to recover on it, and I think you should see gradually improving service in the area.
Well, good. I mean, I hope it'll be more than gradual. It is. I mean, I know I don't need to tell you this, but it's just incredibly frustrating for folks not to be able to get their mail and to have it go on for months and months. And it's the Kansas City area. I'm getting a lot of complaints out of the St. Louis area. So this is just it's got to be a priority. I want to ask you to be sure to tell all of the postal workers how grateful I am for them. I know that they're doing hard work. I'm proud of the work that they're doing, and we rely on them. You know, my state, my gosh, we rely on them. We're a majority rural state, so you know, places like Bering, little town where I grew up, Lexington, other places. Boy, we are grateful for our postal workers, and we are grateful for our post offices. And I know that's something the chairman and I talk about a lot. We don't want to see post offices closed in rural parts of this country, and we want to see the mail delivered on time. So please thank them for all that they're doing, and thank you for your attention to these issues. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. So I'm going to get back to the rural. You've heard a lot about rural places from my colleagues here, and we're certainly seeing changes that are impacting us in Michigan, particularly in the Upper Peninsula, which is about as rural as you can get. And folks up there, just like they do all over the country, rely on timely delivery for the mail. One particularly important thing that's occurring right now in the UP is testing drinking water for bacterial contamination. And that requires one-day delivery. When you take those samples and send it off to the lab, it has to get there in an incredibly timely way for it to be a valid test. That has become an issue for us in the Upper Peninsula. We also know, as all of you know, veterans need access to their medication. They get that primarily from mail service, and that's has to be a continued focus for the Postal Service to make sure that those meds are getting to our veterans on time. We had a hearing that the Postal Service had because of some changes in the UP, and actually postal officials were unaware that we had a VA facility in the Upper Peninsula, which was somewhat striking that they would not be aware. The VA facility is incredibly important to veterans who live in the Upper Peninsula. Postmaster General DeJoy, I know that the Postal Service has not announced a number of changes to the transportation policy at several locations, but we found out recently it was being implemented in Michigan. So my question for you is why weren't communities notified before these changes, before they're rolling out? Why isn't there more transparency so that they know what's happening?
So
you can pull your microphone closer too, please.
Yeah. We make a lot of different transportation changes. I'm trying to think about which, if you're talking about the one-day issue or just a local transportation optimization.
Local, part of the network changes.
Yeah, because it's not intended to have any difference in service standards, right? We run too many trucks with no mail in it all over the country. And the whole process is to try and optimize that so we can cut our costs. I have to get $1.5 billion out of local transportation. The intention of all these initiatives when these items are rolled out are not to have a consequence, right, within the standards. The standards are, 2 to 5 days, and we're delivering 60% of the mail and packages across the country a day in advance, right? So we're trying to take advantage of that cushion that has been built in to make sure that we can optimize our freight. So we did not we didn't change collection box times. We didn't change anything. The mail sits in the system from the time we get it, somewhere in the postal system across the country, whether it's, so that is the essence of the change. It wasn't expected to have an impact. And I don't think in the Upper Peninsula we've had much of an impact on service. So my last check was that for the most part, everything was running pretty smoothly.
Yeah, obviously folks will bring issues up. We look at data. I look at data as well.
Yeah.
And one data point that I think is something we have to be really focused on because there's a great deal of concern of people in the Upper Peninsula, similar to what you heard from my colleague from Nevada, is that the Postal Service, as my understanding, is considering a facility change that would mean local mail going to and from UP residents, but going out of state into Wisconsin instead of the facility that you have in the Upper Peninsula. We think that's going to likely slow mail. So, but my question for you is, are you measuring the impact of these changes on rural service so that we can roll it back if it's having that impact because of folks?
Senator, we all look at, the whole organization looks at service. I've instituted new quality programs across the organization and so forth. Our intentions are to make the service on all these moves, and in fact, it is doable with the proper execution of the strategy. With regard to that particular move, as I said, it's not being dismissive of 10% of the people. It's all of that, and the other 90% has to get to a central point to be collated to go across the country. I can't collate these collations that are done at every one of these little locations to get 10% of the mail out, to go back, adds another step when we get to the location, reduces the density of trays, increases the underutilization of our trucks. This mail should make it wherever we send it to. I don't know exactly where this is going, but it's full intention to come in, to schedule, to do outgoing processing on it, postmark it, cancel it, and turn it around the next morning, get back. We have a 2-day standard to get back. All of this is planned out to work. There are lots of issues in execution that will be, that the team is learning how to make these types of changes. They have not been under the pressure to perform at a level that that we need to, and using the new equipment and perform to a schedule and make these changes. But I'm confident we will get there, and I'll take a special eye on all of these small moves. They're not as consequential of some of the bigger things we did in Richmond and Atlanta. These are just taking the outgoing mail, routing the trucks to consolidating, routing it to a different plant, and putting it through the normal process. People are already in place, turning it around and sending it back down on the trucks. So we think this is going to be, not consequential in the deployment. And
well,
I'm not going to.
Well, I hope so. I mean, what we're seeing though in Richmond, Atlanta, for very obvious reasons, is a red flag for us.
Yeah.
And again, I'm coming to you not as someone against change, because you have to change and you have to become more efficient. But change also creates challenges as to actually the implementation. Mr. Kubayanda, you talked about the advisory opinions that the commission has, to just kind of take a little bit of a pause, to take a look at and talk to stakeholders around. I think, what are your concerns specifically? Could the commission do one of these advisory opinions, and what do you think we would learn from that?
Yes, Senator. I believe an advisory opinion is very valuable and is merited at this time as the Postal Service ramps up this rollout of DFA with the RPDCs and also the optimized collection. I think combined, those are creating what's likely to be a nationwide impact on service, and we do think an advisory opinion is appropriate. As I mentioned in previous advisory opinions in 2021 and 2022, the Commission identified a number of concerns as the Postal Service started to implement some changes. Those concerns included overly optimistic estimates about cost savings, lack of communication with stakeholders, potential impact on rural constituents, potential impact on veterans, and others receiving medications through the mail. All these have come to fruition. We've seen this in the data. We've seen this in the constituent complaints. We've seen this in the Inspector General's recent reports. So I think that advisory opinion process has a lot of value, and we believe that the advisory opinion would be timely right now.
So Postmaster General DeJoy, when I, in my original round of questions and raised the concerns, and you came back and said, no, we're willing to slow things down to make sure that it's all operating correctly, because you're success focused. I've grown to know you over the months here. It seems as if an advisory opinion, slow down, have an advisory opinion to kind of take a look at this while you're continuing to work on making sure that both Richmond and Atlanta are performing. That's going to be your end of the argument. That's the drop the mic moment when Richmond and Atlanta are performing better. They're coming in below cost. The mail delivery services are still there. While you're doing that, also taking a broader look at the impact. Would you be open to this advisory opinion? Is this something that would give you a fresh set of eyes?
I want to discuss with council, but we're in the process of considering an advisory opinion with regard to things that we feel are magnanimous changes to the male community, okay, and are working through what, in fact, we would ask an advisory opinion for, okay, and it's a broad things to try and baseline what our, so that's what we're working through right now. Right, and have been working through over the last six or 8 weeks. But Senator, I just what we're doing.
Well, before you, I'll give you time to answer that. But so, what kind of timeline do you think that'll? You've been doing it for 6 weeks now. When would that determination? What would the context be?
It could be. I would have to take it to the board. It could be this board meeting, or it could be a special board meeting afterwards. Is what we would would
Well,
love
it'd be
to
great
do.
if it could be this upcoming one and show the urgency.
We're working on it. We have to figure out what, exactly it is that we want, because I don't want to do this again. I kind of have a good understanding of what the infrastructure looks like. I don't understand what issues are not making this connect, and we still plan to deploy a very good service. But let me just, if I can,
Yes, you can finish.
opening up a facility within 5 miles of 10 facilities, okay, and putting the right equipment and tools and amenities in it. There's nothing, that's what we're doing across the country. There's nothing magnanimous about that, right? Our inability to execute comes from a long period of time of not executing change in a construction matter, and those types of issues, right? How to load a truck, when to load a truck, trucks running late. All of that have been issues within the Postal Service that we've been working to change since since I got here, and we're making progress on it. So it's important to recognize that the strategy is pretty straightforward, right? We're not, I'm in fact investing in more facilities. I'm opening old facilities that were closed to bring different services with the sorting and delivery centers closer to the communities. We're adding capacity, right? We're teaching our people and so forth. But the pace that we need to change, because we can do all these things, I could avoid those critiques, all these critiques like everyone before me did, right? And we'll continue down the spiral, to where everything is much, much worse and much, much broader than what it is today, okay? So,
Yeah.
but that is what there's nothing with regard to the plan. It has to do with our execution of it, and we are working on that, and that will, will get better. But this is where we are on the 360. And
again, I'm all about data, and I'm all about how changes need to be made, and execution has to be there. So this is a really complex situation. I know you walked into this as well. But you are a data person as well, as I've gotten to know you, that we want to look at the data. The data does not look great in Richmond. It looks really terrible in Atlanta. You can change that narrative pretty dramatically by showing those numbers are changing. And I think you could agree that a lot of folks get nervous when you see those kinds of numbers and you're like, why are we going to continue to roll this out? That's not saying it can't work. It may very well work, but you just need to demonstrate that. And when you demonstrate that, people will get on board, and that'll be a great thing. But we're just saying, let's step back a little bit, keep working on Richmond and Atlanta. That's going to take time to get that implementation down. You're going to learn a whole lot of lessons. I'm sure that happened in you were very successful in the private sector. You did that as well. You didn't want to disrupt your customers. You would take time to be able to figure that out. Mm-hmm. Having an advisory opinion coming in as well, taking it from a holistic standpoint, just creates more transparency, which builds more trust, because this is about trust. That's the biggest part of it. I look forward to seeing what you put forward on the advisory committee. I think that's very, very, very positive.
But just to be clear, we have been answering from the chairman dozens and dozens of questions. Every week, we get questions from the Postal Regulatory Commission about what it is we're doing, where every post office is in the country, and other types of things. And we've been submitting information, and the PRC as well. I've briefed the PRC quarterly, right, with regard to what we're doing. So that it's not that would, and I can't think of how to be more transparent. I speak everywhere. We brief people. We have union meetings. We speak to everybody, all the groups that we can before we do these things. But yes, we will keep you posted as to. I'll let you know when we in fact decide what we're going to do.
Well, I appreciate your desire to be transparent. So I'm going to make some requests here. In my letters to the Postal Service about your plans, I have asked for several specific sets of information, and we have not received full answers. Specifically, I would like the Postal Service to provide the committee, one, a list of locations the Postal Service plans to change with specific timelines for implementation, meaning when do you actually intend to make those changes on the ground at these places. 2, full service data on every location implemented so far, and that means data for every type of facility before and after implementation. And 3, documentation for any cost projections, impact studies that the Postal Service has conducted. That's just data. You must be looking at this. This is stuff, obviously, you're looking at too, I would assume, in your due diligence. We would like to have that from the committee as well. Would you commit to providing that information to the committee by May 1st?
I don't know. Let me get back to the office, sir, and I'll have Peter get in touch with Annika, and we'll give you a date on that.
Is that something you think is doable?
May 1st?
May 1st? You should have this information, I suspect, already.
Yeah, so let me just explain one thing about cost data, right? To drive cost out of the system, we need the system.
Well, you have projections, though. I don't disagree, you need a system. But you have, when you make those changes, you're clearly projecting, just like in private industry, you're going to project profit, you're going to project costs.
I sent you a letter telling you what I'm trying to get, $5.5 billion out of the system. All right?
Well, we'd like to have those impact studies. We'll work with your team to try to do that May 1st. That would be important. And obviously, the other piece of all this, Chairman Martinez, in your oversight function and the Board of Governors as well, and I'll just end with this kind of question and thought here. Election mail obviously is a very delicate operation for the Postal Service. You've heard some of my colleagues talk about it, and it requires a lot of coordination. My question for you, sir, is before you allow the Postal Service to move forward with some of these changes, are you willing to stop and consider or reconsider potential impacts on election mail if you believe that that is a risk? And will you be very open and transparent about that process to make sure that we can count on election mail getting there in a timely way, which is essential for our democracy?
Senator, our duty of care is basically to stay informed as we do as a board and to provide oversight. We have been very strong on making sure that elections work very smoothly and on time. In August of 2020, when there was a lot of criticism about whether that would happen in November of 2020, the board established a special committee, an election mail committee that was at the time headed by Governor Moak, to make sure that everything would work and was coordinated with management to make it sure that the election worked smoothly, and it did. After I became chair, we made the special committee permanent, and now it's a standing committee of the board, and that's chaired by Governor McReynolds, who's an expert on election matters. She meets regularly with management. There's a special task force in management dedicated to election mail performance. So we will be on top of this. We don't want to come back here in January or February, although my term expires in December, and face you and say, hey, it didn't work. You can be assured that we're going to be on top of it. I cannot make assurances ahead of time of what we would do or not do, because it would be, frankly, non-prudent.
Very good. Good. Well, I hope that's the case, and appreciate your focus on that. I do appreciate that. You know, I think I speak for everybody on the committee. We want the Postal Service to be successful. This is just absolutely critical for our country. It's why we really get support for the postal reform legislation that passed a while ago. Postmaster General DeJoy, you were very helpful in getting us to get that passed as well. I appreciate that. There's other things that we can do legislatively, and I'm certainly open to those discussions, particularly related to investments. Those are things that need to be looked at. I will say we tried to do some of those fixes before, and we ran into hurdles to do that, so it's not an easy thing to do, but I do believe it's incredibly important that we do, so I agree with that. But I'm just laser focused, as I know all of you are. It's about service. It's about making sure that the American people can count on it. You have a really hard job. You're delivering to every single address in America and providing that connectivity that was a vision of Benjamin Franklin. You're living on quite a legacy. The first Postmaster General, Benjamin Franklin, you're living on that legacy to be able to do that. And we stand ready to help, but we just need more transparency. We need to know what's happening. We want some caution and not just believing that a plan works, but also being able to back that up with data that shows that it's actually happening. And if it's not happening as fast as we like, we're okay with that as long as we're working to try to figure out how to fix it. But we shouldn't necessarily be potentially reckless in moving forward with a big change before you've worked out some of the kinks. And when I say kinks, you know, kinks are things like getting medicine on time. It's like getting your test, bacterial test on time to find out if your drinking water is that. Those are not just kinks. Those are significant concerns that people have. And the American people have always relied on the U.S. Postal Service. I want to continue to rely on the U.S. Postal Service for another century or more. That's going to require all of us working together, kind of breaking down turf battles and fights. Know that I'm about just trying to solve this problem. I know all of you want to solve these problems. Let's do that together. And it really starts with having transparency and having other stakeholders and voices being heard in this process as we move forward. So
Senator,
thank you for being here.
If I may add something.
Sure.
I can say that the board agrees 100% with the objectives that you have laid out, which are consistent with what the Postmaster General's objectives are. I would just point out to keep in mind, this huge restructuring is happening at the same time that we got to deliver service. It's not as if we're doing it from scratch.
I get it.
Okay, so it's difficult stuff. And the statistic that always floors people is, we handle daily almost 400 million pieces of mail and packages. The scale of this organization is huge, and that's what we're trying to deal with and change and improve.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, we're aware of that, and steering, changing course is not easy. I served in the U.S. Navy. It's a lot different steering a destroyer than an aircraft carrier. So, and you have an aircraft carrier on steroids, basically. So let's work together. But please, Postmaster General DeJoy, please give us this information. It's really important to have that. And please, let's just look at data and understand data speaks loud, and good data ends up building a lot of trust as well, which is what we need. So with that, again, thank you for all of you being here today. The record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until 5 p.m. on May 1st, 2024 for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.